Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Getwellbe Podcast. This podcast is designed to arm you with the knowledge and awareness you need to get and stay well your whole life. Today we've got a great episode for you with an eczema expert, but before we jump in, I have a quick announcement for you. As of March 1st, I've opened up 3 spots for my private, holistic patient advocacy services. So if you're someone trying to figure out a chronic health issue, or you've been told many different things but really want to understand the root cause of various symptoms and reverse them, I work with people on that journey. There are a lot more details about what that entails and how I work with people at getwellbe.com. So head there to learn more or schedule a free discovery call if you think you'd benefit from my help. All right, now for today's episode, I sat down with Abby Tai, who is an eczema-focused nutritionist and the host of the Eczema Podcast. We spoke all about this miserable skin disease and what the root causes of it really are, how it actually physically happens in the body, the difference between eczema and psoriasis, and also how people have successfully healed eczema. So without further ado, here is Abby Tai. Abby, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Adrian, for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'm so happy to be here.
So first of all, what led you to found Eczema Conquerors? Obviously, it must have been something pretty, I don't want to say traumatic, but pretty profound as far as life experience.
Yes. And I went through really severe eczema. And I know some people pronounce it as eczema. Some people pronounce it as eczema. I know a lot of Canadians tend to pronounce it as eczema. So if you hear me pronouncing it differently, that might be why, but it's both work. And I went through it really severely, even as a kid. And it took away a lot of moments in my life. I had a lot of trauma from it. And because of that, I once made a promise that if I ever healed, I would share my story with as many people around the world and help as many people as I could to overcome this and not have to suffer like I did.
Well, that's beautiful and a wonderful motivation. So the way you just said that leads me to believe that you did overcome it. And as far as I can see from, just your face, you have great skin. So please share how you overcame it.
Yeah, so it's definitely been a very up and down journey. There's been a lot of moments where I felt like a disabled person, and I would classify myself as having been disabled because of it, which is really strange. You would never think of having a skin condition as something that could actually disable you. But it's possible that when it gets so severe that everything just becomes so painful. And so my story starts when my mom always said that I had it as a baby and I had it very mild. But as a teenager, I moved back to Asia and I lived in Hong Kong. And I just remember my mom saying that when I moved there, things would get a lot better. And sadly, it was the other way around where it actually got a little bit worse. And it wasn't terrible. It was still manageable. But it wasn't until I was about 15 years old and my first boyfriend broke up with me. And when that happened, he was my first love. And I just remember that feeling where my heart just shattered. And it felt awful being dumped at that age and just feeling like your whole world ended. And so that's how I felt. And I just remember things being so difficult and painful. And I think I just released so much anger and stress and onto my skin. And from that moment on, my whole entire body became 95% covered in eczema from head to toe. Pretty much every part was covered except for my nose and under my feet as well. And that is the moment when I felt like eczema started to take away my life, and it stole so many moments away from me. I remember when it was painful to move, to walk, to sleep, taking a shower stung, washing my face stung. I remember my parents would have to help me vacuum my sheets and also the floor every day, and I would just be bleeding a lot. And I tried to hide it, but the weather in Hong Kong was so hot that even if I wore a sweater and we wore uniforms, so I had to show my legs. And I just remember not being able to hide it very well. And I missed a lot of school, and teachers even asked me if I wanted to move my exams because of it. And so I just remember coming home crying every day and just being really suicidal. and asking God to end my life because it was just so terrible. And now I realize there was a purpose for going through it. I moved back to Canada for university, and my skin started to clear up naturally because the environment there was better for my skin. But as I got older, for some strange reason, my skin started to flare again, and it had never flared before in Canada. And the strange thing was that I could no longer just pick up and move like I did before to use that as a way to heal. And so I really had to find alternative ways to heal and to get better. It was hard. It was painful. One thing that I did find was that when I started to change my diet a lot, my skin actually got a lot better. And at one point, I remember it was so scary, so traumatic that there were times when even makeup couldn't cover the texture of my skin. And even if I took a bath, there would be all these dead skin flakes just surrounding the bathtub. And it was gross. And it was really tough. And I remember my naturopath once said that it took him 2 months just to see what my normal face looked like. It was just very disfigured, and I felt very disabled. I soon realized that nutrition was really able to help my skin get better, and also digging into the root cause. And long story short, my skin started getting a lot better, even though I did have some flare-ups after giving birth. But yeah, thankfully, I really believe that there's a way to heal and to get better. And so that's what I'm here to bring, that hope, and help encourage your listeners that it's possible to reverse this and to get better as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that incredibly tough story. I mean, I obviously didn't know the extent of your journey and your disease, and it sounds horrific, but I'm glad there's a happy ending. Could you share with us what exactly is eczema and how is it different from psoriasis?
Yeah, definitely. So eczema is characterized by itchy, red, inflamed skin. It can also become really dry and flaky at times as well. And often it presents itself as rashes, usually inside our elbows and also behind our knees, but it can actually happen anywhere as well. For some people who have it really severely, it can be all over the body, but for others, it can be on the scalp or the face as well. And psoriasis is different because it is actually due to the skin cell turnover happening too fast. So our skin cells usually turn over every 30 days, but in terms of psoriasis, it happens a lot quicker. It can happen every 3 to 4 days. The skin cells build up really quickly, and it can become flaky. And so the comorbidities that can come with each of them, with eczema and psoriasis, are also different as well. For example, psoriasis can come with issues with arthritis and liver issues as well. But with eczema, there can be other issues such as heart issues as well in the future. I think there were studies that showed that it was linked to high rates of heart disease. But yeah, those are things that we definitely want to manage and really get to the root cause so that we don't experience those.
You know, you talked about the connection between food and gut issues. And I saw a 2018 study that was in the PLOS Journal of Medicine about how maternal probiotic and fish oil supplementation reduced the risk of eczema and food allergies in babies when their mothers were, pregnant, and taking the probiotics and the fish oil. And so I know a lot about the gut microbiome. It's a big focus of the Wellbe podcast and just how, your microbiome affects all these different things. But we know now, skin issues, right, are very linked to the gut. And so it made sense to me when I saw this article. They're like, oh yeah, of course. You're going to have that because there's a connection there. But really, what is the main connection between how food and gut issues affect your skin? What is physically happening for that to occur if you're eating, let's say, a diet that's mostly fast food?
Yeah, actually, before I jump into that, Adrian, I also wanted to point out another interesting study that came out that showed that when mothers who are pregnant use a lot of disinfectant, they actually had higher rates of eczema in their babies as well. So there's definitely that link with the gut microbiome.
Right. And so, for anybody that isn't clear on what that connection is, the disinfectant would be wiping off the good bacteria on your skin microbiome, because your skin has a microbiome, your gut has a microbiome, and then also your mouth has a microbiome. And so people that use disinfectant on the skin, right, that's changing that microbiome, and therefore the bacterial balance gets out of whack, and it looks like it can lead to eczema. So tell me about, what exactly is going on if there's a person who, eats a ton of fast food and then ends up with eczema. Like how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, not everyone will notice a difference on their skin if they're eating fast food. I like to call the bucket theory of inflammation, where everyone has a different bucket load and everyone can handle a different load of inflammation in their body. And what we found is that the more someone is showing symptoms on their skin, the more that their bucket has overflowed. So if you picture a bucket, whenever we add on more things to it, like toxins, medications, inflammatory foods, things like antibiotics, things that disrupt the gut microbiome, we start to fill that bucket. And once we get to the top, when it starts to overflow, that's when we see the symptoms happen. And so some people can tolerate junk food, they can tolerate processed foods, and they might not have a lot of eczema symptoms, whereas someone may have a bucket that's overflowing more. And so even if they just eat a little bit of junk food and a little bit of processed food, their body can't tolerate it and they can flare up right away. And so that looks different for each person. Other people we found might even have, for example, things like a leaky gut, where if they eat certain foods or if they're not even digesting it well, or if they have issues with low stomach acid, we find that all comes into play, and eating junk food and processed and inflammatory foods can make that even worse. And so when they eat that, if they're not digesting foods properly, it can travel through leaky gut into the bloodstream and cause reactions that way. So there's multiple things that are happening when someone does eat inflammatory foods or junk foods.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. The concept of a toxic bucket or a toxic burden is something we talk about a lot on the Wellbe podcast too. So I like that analogy because, when you, for example, like personal care products, right? People are like, okay, I told you I have constipation and, migraines and depression, and you're telling me I have to change my shampoo. Like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, it's all part of the bucket because your body doesn't really differentiate, right, between a hamburger, a stressful thought, a toxic shampoo, and like mold in your house, right? It's just all coming in as toxins and contributing to this bucket and whether or not it overflows. And so it seems like eczema and some of these other skin conditions are one of the ways that can manifest. It's like one of the symptoms of this bucket overflowing. So it's an inflammatory condition. So we just mentioned a few of them, but obviously you know a lot more about eczema specifically than I do. So would you elaborate on what the possible root causes of eczema are that doctors don't always look at or recognize or tell patients about?
Yeah, so I love this because this is what I'm passionate about. And this is something that we're constantly digging into with our clients, because what we find is that we do a lot of calls with clients. And one thing that we hear on call after call is that they are so tired of their doctor just giving them medication after medication, and they find that it's not going anywhere, and they really want another solution. They want a better way. And one of the things that we have found is that a lot of doctors give topical creams or even oral medications. We find that tends to be more of a Band-Aid approach. It tends to suppress the issues and the symptoms, but it doesn't really get to the root of what's happening. It tends to be a outside-in approach. And so our goal is to really take an inside-out approach and look at what some of these root causes can be. Like you mentioned, there can be up to 15 to 16 different root causes. Anything like overgrowth of bacteria, fungal overgrowth, yeast overgrowth, candida, parasites, heavy metals. We've even found that even with things like adrenal fatigue or thyroid issues can also affect the skin as well. Nutrient deficiency deficiencies, mold, hormonal imbalances. And so there's a really wide range of things that can really cause the skin to flare. And we find that not everyone has all 15 to 16 of these root causes. It's usually a combination of them, for example, 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 of them. But at the root of it, we've even found that poor digestion and even things like low stomach acid, that also comes into play and affects the skin a lot as well.
Wow. That is a lot of different ones. And I feel like there's the bad bugs, the bad microbes piece of it to me is so unknown. Like so few people think like, oh, I have fungus, I have a parasite, and that's what's on my making my skin react this way. It's just so interesting how few doctors really make that connection.
Yeah. And also, I just want to share something interesting is that we're starting to find that dental issues are affecting the skin as well, because 45% of your oral bacteria overlaps with your bacteria in your gut. And so whenever there's issues in our mouth, that can also start to affect our gut and our skin as well. I've interviewed some biological dentists who have shared that even just removing root canals or infected teeth or even bacteria in the teeth, even that, they've seen some of their patients have their skin or their eczema clear up, in some cases within a week of removing those infected teeth.
Wow,
or even the
within
teeth with bacteria.
a week. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw, but I just put out an episode of the podcast that was with Hannah Bronfman, who's like a social media influencer, fitness, wellness. And she told the story of having infertility and some other kind of like chronic fatigue type symptoms, and finding out that a bike accident that had knocked her teeth out, and then she'd had to have some implants and things done and surgery. There had been a chronic infection as a result. And so she had the infections cleaned out and was able to get pregnant like a couple of months later. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I saw you posted that.
Yeah. So I'm not amazed, but the more I hear, it seems like it's coming at me from every direction, especially what you just said, because I knew that inherently from what she was explaining, that of course, like if there's a bacterial imbalance anywhere in your body, it could cause skin issues. But now just this awareness of like these chronic infections being linked to infertility and perhaps skin disorders, it's just makes you really never want to have any sort of dental surgery, because there just could be a lingering infection that's
exactly.
And it's very hard and very expensive to undo. So, or to get rid of, to get cleaned out. So beyond that, you mentioned something to me before we started this interview that I thought was very interesting. There's a connection between suicide and eczema. And of course, you shared your own story of having, suicidal ideations, but will you tell us, I know there's some research related to it. So what is that? What's the connection? Because I feel like it plays into this whole microbiome thing in some way.
Yeah, some interesting facts that I wanted to share about depression are that children and adolescents with eczema are 2 to 6 times more likely to have depression and anxiety compared to children without it. And also adults who have eczema are 2.5 to 3 times more at risk for anxiety and depression as well. And there's also studies that show that people with eczema are 44% more likely to exhibit thoughts about suicide and 36% more likely to attempt suicide as well. So those are very scary stats that tend to be higher than the regular population who doesn't have this condition.
Right. And so the connection, I'm sure, you can explain it better than I can, but I would assume the fact that we know that there's a gut-brain axis, right? There's something called the vagus nerve, and it connects the gut microbiome and the brain. And it's bidirectional. So the gut is sending messages to the brain. If there's bad microbes, it can cause things like thoughts of depression and anxiety, but the other way around as well. So if you have very stressful thoughts, it'll cause some gut symptoms, sometimes constipation, leaky gut, things like that, or contribute to, I should say. So is that really the connection to the suicidal ideations that the studies were aware of, or they were just saying there was a connection and they didn't really explore it further?
I think that it's multifactorial. What you mentioned comes into play, especially when so many of us are walking around with guts that are not in optimal shape, especially because of either the food that we're eating or just some of the root causes I shared about earlier, different pathogens, hidden infections. Those can all affect our gut, but also our mood and really affect depression and suicidal thoughts as well. But also just having eczema in general. Having eczema is like, it's so tough because when you have it, sometimes when you look at your face in the mirror, or at least this has happened to myself, just waking up and seeing new rashes on your face, it gets scary to look in the mirror sometimes. It lowers your self-esteem, it lowers your confidence. There's been times I felt like I was really disfigured. And so even just meeting people, meeting friends, meeting family, that embarrassment and shame and judgment comes along with it.
We'll be right back with Abby Tai after this quick message. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast, so I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the WellBe community. So head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn all about my private holistic patient advocacy work, my programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health, and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. You can find me at getwellbe. Okay, now back to my interview with Abby Tai.
There have been studies that show that oral steroids, which are given to a lot of people who have eczema, they're actually linked to different side effects. So not only are they linked to side effects like insomnia, depression, anxiety, but they're also linked to other side effects that are not talked about very much and doctors don't share about a lot as well. They're linked to other things like suicidal thoughts and also homicidal thoughts as well. And so I interviewed a dermatologist and he shared that he actually tries to avoid giving oral steroids as much as possible because in a few of his patients, he has noticed that they can become homicidal and suicidal. He has one patient where if his patient takes the oral steroids, she has to ask her kid and her husband to leave the house just because of some of those fears. And there has been on the news, there has been one case where a girl committed suicide and also unfortunately murdered her parents as well. And when I interviewed that dermatologist, he mentioned that it is possible that it could be due to the oral steroids. And the scary thing is that a lot of doctors are still giving out oral steroids without sharing the side effects. So I remember when I did share this, not a lot of people had heard about it or knew about it. But another side effect as well that I wanted to share is that there's also something called steroid-induced dementia. And so basically, some of the symptoms of dementia can come up when steroids are taken. But there's been research that shows that it tends to go back to normal after the steroids are removed. So yeah, lots of factors that come into play when it affects depression and suicidal thoughts.
That is so crazy. I had no idea that oral steroids, which, yes, that's very much given today still to people with this condition and babies and toddlers and children and adults, of course, too, but was linked to, suicidal ideations and homicidal ideations. That's just terrifying. I mean, gosh, the number of people on these things. And then you just think about the potential for murder. I mean, it's just terrifying. Mm-hmm. On the topic of steroids, there are also topical steroids, right?
Yes.
And there's a lot of side effects as well from topical steroids. I know that. Will you share some of those as well? And also just talk about in general, what a topical solution for eczema does and why it doesn't actually sort of solve the problem for good. It just kind of covers it up.
Sure. So there's something that's starting to happen that a lot of people are noticing. And there's a big community on social media with people who are coming out and sharing their experiences with this. There's something called topical steroid withdrawal, which is basically when people have used steroids for some time and they find that when they come off of it, there's actually a rebound effect and their skin gets so much worse than when they started. For some people, it's leaving them disabled. For some people, it's leaving them bedridden. They're not able to leave their house. I have a friend who went through a divorce because of it. And there's just so many side effects that are coming along with it. And more doctors are starting to realize it and recognize it, but still the majority of doctors around the world don't really acknowledge it. And there's actually an organization called ITSAN, and they're trying to bring awareness and actually make this a formal diagnosis that topical steroid withdrawal does exist. And a lot of people are going through it. There's actually celebrities going through it as well. And so it's not easy. And the difference between topical steroid withdrawal and eczema is that there can be a lot more side effects that come along with it, not just the physical symptoms of having it on your skin, but it can also come with things like feeling chills or even sweats, feeling like ants are crawling in your skin. And so just a lot of symptoms like that. Also symptoms of feeling what we call zingers, where it feels like you're being electrocuted or zapped. So it's really, really uncomfortable and just it's so difficult to live with. So what we're finding is that these topical solutions are not always working. But it's not just steroids that it's limited to. Also other topical creams like Protopic and Elidel, those that are given can also create withdrawal symptoms that people are starting to experience. And there's also Facebook groups dedicated to it where people are sharing their experiences on this. It's just so unfortunate to see just so many people going through withdrawal. Sometimes for people who are waiting it out, I've noticed that if they are not actively doing something to really get to the root cause, whether their root cause is hidden infections or pathogens or doing something to help with their gut health, I noticed that they tend to go through it longer. And some of them even go through, they like to call it like a 3-year anniversary, 4-year anniversary, or even 5-year anniversary of topical steroid withdrawal. And so it's tough to see so many people going through this.
I will say, I think it's worth us explaining, just simply how steroids work and why there would be this kind of withdrawal, because I think sometimes not even patients with skin issues understand fully what they're getting. They think they're getting medicine when they get a prescription, but they don't really understand like how steroids work. So could you just give a quick explanation?
Yeah, so basically when we put steroids on the body, they help to reduce some of the inflammation that's caused by the cells. And so because it helps to lower the inflammation, it really helps to suppress what's happening. But because it's suppressing what's happening, it's suppressing the issues and it becomes a Band-Aid. And it's not really getting to the root cause. There's a saying, when you treat something externally, you will forever be treating it eternally.
Got it. And I think it's important to mention that when you say it helps to, bring down the inflammation, how it's doing that is the inflammation is coming from your body's own immune system reacting to a problem, right? And so it's overreacting, in this way and causing the symptom. And so what a steroid does is it like zaps your immune system, it neutralizes it so it can't work. And when it can't work, then it won't create the symptoms of skin issues or autoimmunity and things like that. So if you think about that for 1 second, as any kind of logical human, you want your immune system to work. And so when it's not working properly, there's a reason why. And we need to figure out that reason why and then help it to get, back to a good place. Versus when you use a steroid, you're basically, blowing up your own immune system temporarily so that it's not giving the cry for help in the symptom of eczema. Besides the horrific side effects and withdrawal symptoms that you mentioned, it's such a disservice that I think a lot of doctors are doing when they give somebody a steroid, whether it's topical or oral, without explaining how that works. and how people's own immune systems are being, shot down and compromised by using these things for a long period of time, or even just temporarily, but then again, temporarily and again and again, and going on a pattern like that for, decades sometimes. So I'm glad we were able to kind of flush that out for people, because I think there's a lot of confusion around that.
And also, I once heard someone describe it really well, in a sense that they described it as putting a steroid is basically because you're putting a corticosteroid and cortisol, which is similar to the hormone that the adrenal glands produce. It's kind of like your body becomes so dependent on it. And it's almost like, let's say, like if you had a bank that kept giving you money for years and years, and you didn't have to work for it. And so you would become so dependent on it. And in the same way, it's kind of like you're getting all this cortisol for so long. And then once you remove it, your body becomes dependent. And so our adrenal glands can be affected by it too. And a lot of people can experience adrenal fatigue. So it's tough, a lot of side effects that come along with it.
Yes. And your adrenals are very connected to your thyroid function. As somebody that has thyroid issues, I've learned a lot about the connection. Your adrenals really tell your thyroid what to do, and your thyroid is the engine for your whole body. So if you're taking a drug that affects your adrenals, and then you might then have thyroid problems as a result. So you could follow the trail to figure some things out that might be going on if you have both eczema and are taking steroids, and you have thyroid problems, for example, or adrenal fatigue, or both. I have another question for you. Why does eczema seem to come and go? Because I have friends that have it, or whose children have it, and it seems like they're always about to maybe try to figure out the root cause and do the real digging, but then it kind of goes away for a while, and then they lose motivation to really figure it out because it seems to be going away. And then maybe it comes back for a flare, or, kind of doesn't. And maybe, is it possible to kind of grow out of it or something? So how does that work?
Yeah, it's possible to grow out of it. We have seen people who have, but just because someone doesn't experience the symptoms showing up on their skin doesn't mean that the issue went away inside of whether it's in their gut or what their root issue was. Sometimes symptoms come and go. It doesn't always show up on the skin. It's interesting. I feel like the body is very interesting at communicating, and sometimes it's more silent, and sometimes it's better at hiding, and sometimes it's better at showing it. Other factors come into play as well, I feel like. For example, climate, like when people are on vacation and they're next to the beach, I hear a lot of people say that their skin tends to get better. And then when they come back, they feel like their skin gets worse. Or even if people go through a stressful time in their life, they feel like it gets a lot worse. And then they feel like when they get over it, their skin tends to get better. But I've also met someone who mentioned that when she got out of a relationship that she was in, her skin actually improved a lot. And it was probably a stressful relationship for her. And I've also heard the opposite, where it's gotten worse when they came out of a relationship. So one of the biggest struggles that eczema sufferers get is that a lot of us, myself included, we become really paranoid whenever the flare-ups show. We try to figure out, was it this that caused it? Was it that? Was it something I ate? Was it the environment? Was it something I did? Was it because I didn't do a certain thing? I didn't exercise, things like that. And a lot of factors come into play, especially because our body is a holistic system that works together. So even our lymphatic system, when it's not working optimally, that affects our skin. And so it's not just the gut, but it's everything that you mentioned, the liver, the adrenal glands, the thyroid. Even I have some thyroid symptoms as well, which I have to constantly work on as well, because that affects my skin too. And so, yeah, everything comes into play. And yeah, definitely some people find that their skin comes and goes, whereas some people find that they constantly have those symptoms screaming and shouting at them. But one thing I would encourage people to do is that even if you find that it's not bothering you as much, or that it comes and goes, is to really still dig deep, because why is that happening? And why does that keep happening? There's a reason that that's happening. And topical solutions alone are usually not enough to get to the bottom of it.
Right. Yeah. Like something that's coming and going is still coming back again. So I imagine some people want to think, oh, well, it went away. My body must be doing better. instead of like, okay, why does it keep coming back? I should figure that part out. Yeah. So yeah, I strongly encourage anybody dealing with skin issues to dig deep, because like Abby just said, they are so connected to, the way that your body detoxifies through your lymph and how your organs work, and, certainly infections and toxins that affect the microbiome. It's really miraculous when you keep going back to it. And for so many years, we've thought of it as a skin condition that stays on the skin, right? Always treating it from the outside in. Always, same with acne. I think so many people I know always were doing these very complicated, skincare rituals for acne and this and that. And nobody knew in, high school, when I was in high school or college, or even after that was, I don't want to say for nothing, but that the main root of the problem was, coming from the inside, and they could spend a lot of money on products, but it was going to keep coming, from things that were going on. So thanks to people like you, there's awareness on a more and more mainstream level, but certainly you have a lot more work to do on that.
Yeah. My goal is to spread more awareness about really digging deep.
It really is needed, I think, just from some of the people that I know were, smart and open, but they're just not being told the things that you're talking about. So have you seen eczema be fully reversed ever?
Yeah, I have seen people who have found that their skin has definitely cleared up a lot. And I really believe that it is possible to reverse a lot of things that are happening. I've even found that when the skin gets better, we're also able to tolerate a lot more foods. Like, for example, at one point, my skin was so flared up and so red, so inflamed, just going through so many issues. And I remember the moment I ate the wrong food, the moment I put it into my mouth, it touched my tongue would tingle, my fingers would tingle. And thankfully, a lot of that has reversed. At one point, I couldn't even tolerate eating meat. I would just flare, even fats. We find that a lot of people with eczema can't tolerate fats as well. Like even things like coconut oil, their face can start flaring, or other parts of their body can start flaring. And so there's a lot of linkage between digestion and our skin. Yeah, so I really believe that it can be reversed, and I'm able to eat a lot more foods that I couldn't eat in the past as well.
My husband just had a case of food poisoning, and he had basically gotten over it. And then we had a family dinner with some really nice organic grass-fed steaks. And he thought he was fine to eat normally again, because he had been eating, crackers and water basically for a couple of days. And he had a full relapse into how sick he'd been with the food poisoning. And he was able to talk to a doctor about it. And, the doctor mentioned that our microbiomes, our digestive bacteria that break down all of our food, there's certain levels, and that, fats especially are like a deeper level of digestion that the microbiome and all of our good bacteria have to break down. And it's harder for them to do that. So as you're saying this, I'm thinking about it, and I'm assuming, that people with skin issues, especially eczema, probably don't have enough good gut bacteria, right? So if fats are harder for our good gut bacteria to break down, that kind of makes sense to me, right? That fats would be a challenge because they're already compromised or challenged, hence the skin symptoms. So of course, like fats would be a challenge for digestion.
And also one thing we found is that we do gut tests and stool tests as well. And what we found is that when there is low stomach acid, it also tends to let more bacteria in, especially because we need enough stomach acid to kill the bacteria and pathogens in. So we tend to see that overgrowth of bacteria, more pathogens. And we're also not able to digest fats as well. And even sometimes our digestion is wonky in general. And so I feel like there's definitely a lot that we have to work on, not just with digestion, but just pathogens, hidden infections as a whole. Just so much to dig deep into.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned before we wrap up that I want to circle back to that we didn't talk that much about that is important are just environmental toxins, because they contribute to that toxic bucket. And so if you do have a pathogen let's say, candida, and your body is really compromised and struggling because a lot of your toxic bucket is filled up with, mold and metals in the water and the air, or some chemicals from a power plant that's, near your house, or you live near a highway. So you're, breathing all of those toxic fumes in, then it's distracted, right? Your body's not able to mount a good offensive against the candida fungus. It's compromised in dealing with all of these other things that are filling up the toxic bucket. So that's, to me, one thing that people are like, well, how can like mold in my house that I'm living in cause these skin issues if they're supposed to come from the inside, right? Because they're thinking like, oh, it's touching the skin, but it's like, no, that's kind of the circle, right, of how it all comes together.
Exactly. Yeah. So many environmental toxins that we don't see. Even like you mentioned, pollution. We found that living in urban cities tends to have higher prevalence of eczema versus living in rural cities.
Right.
And so, it's everything comes into play, and it's very interesting how it can affect the skin as a whole.
So interesting. I lived in China actually 3 different times in my life, and Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong.
That's
and
amazing.
All of them had pollution issues, but Beijing was the worst. When I lived there, it was the year 2000. And my skin, I mean, just from, I think the soot, a lot of coal was being burned, just, it felt off. And I think, there's an internal component to toxins in the air, right? Which I was just talking about, they come in, they contribute to your toxic load or your toxic bucket, which affects your, microbiome being able to do its work, blah, blah, blah. But there's also just like it's coming in through your skin.
Yes, exactly.
And harming your skin microbiome, which is its own thing. Certainly, I noticed that when I was there. And I'm sure that when you then moved back to Hong Kong with your family and you thought it would get better and it got worse, that likely played some kind of role, because I know Hong Kong has much better pollution than Beijing, but it's still not great.
Yeah, and also the water as well. Just one thing that we found is that having a water filter and water softener helps, because hard water has actually been linked to higher rates of eczema as well. And so
how does that work? What's in the hard water that would?
Yeah, so because it has those minerals like the calcium and the other minerals, it can actually dry out the skin. And we found that after you take a shower, it can take up to 6 hours for your skin's pH levels to balance back to normal. And because of that, it affects the skin barrier. And so getting a water softener can help with that, but also a water filter so that your skin is not the filter for the water. And also we find that adding in products can help to acidify the skin barrier, to keep bacteria out and reduce inflammation. And that can all help the skin mantle get better.
Interesting. Well, this has been so informative. I've really, really enjoyed everything that we're learning about this condition, and also feeling both terrified by some of the things you shared about the current treatments and homicidal ideations and some of these other things, which, gosh, like, a teenager fighting this battle like you were, and then being put on something that would then create even more of a mental illness impact or just mental health symptoms, just seems so wrong to me. But it's, going to be awareness that changes the system and makes it so that, these other things are being explained and worked on with eczema patients and with doctors, and not just, here's a steroid kind of over and over. Abby, thank you so much. Please let us know how to learn more about Eczema Conquerors and your work.
Thank you, Adrian, for having me. And you can find me anywhere on social media. I'm on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, all at Eczema Conquerors. And my website is eczemaconquerors.com. I also have a podcast called the Eczema Podcast, which was the very first podcast out there with 6 years of information. In case you ever want more resources to help your skin get better, we're here to help you with that as well.
Great. That's a great resource. Okay, Abby, well, thank you again. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And good luck with this very hard but doable and exciting challenge that you've chosen for your work to spread the word about the real, root causes of eczema and how to really heal. You're doing great work.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, for having me. It's been so nice connecting with you here and sharing information to help others.
You're so welcome. Bye, Abby.
Bye.
So that's all for today. I learned a tremendous amount about eczema from this interview with Abby, and I hope you did too. To read the written version of this guide with plenty of research links, head to getwellbe.com or check out the link to the article in the show notes. And while you're there, definitely become a WellBe Insider to get our latest content weekly in your inbox. If you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. And please share this episode with family or friends who you think might find it valuable and informative. It means a lot and helps more people find the podcast. And finally, if you love the Get WellBe podcast, please leave me a quick review. If you already have, then thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks again for listening to the Get WellBe podcast.